beginning of Kisese talks about, towards the beginning, Kisese talks about the idea of a Ben Seir Umayra, right? Not on the page yet, but I'm just talking about it briefly because it's relevant to the Rashi. Ben Seir Umayra is a boy that a certain age, the Gemara actually says that it never practically happened because there's so many conditions to get it to happen. But the idea is he's going down a very bad route. He's living a very gluttonous and a very free lifestyle, not listening to his parents. He might be stealing, he might be indulging, he might be overeating. He's doing all these bad things. And eventually, the idea, the parents have to take him into Beis Din. There's a little bit of a procession going, and he's put to death. That's the idea behind a Ben Seir Umayra. It's going to be relevant. Keep that in your pocket for a minute. After the Torah talks about Ben Seir Umayra, it talks about somebody that was put to death, somebody that was deserving, was punished with capital punishment. Let's start right away with this pasuk on top. V'chi yiyeh v'ish, and when it'll happen by a man, chet mishpat mavis, an avera that caused him to be put to death, v'humas, and he's killed. V'salisa isai ala eitz, and they hang him up on a tree. So anybody that we all know that there's 4 types of misas basin. Somebody call them out. Skilas reifa, yeah. Hereg, yeah, and last one? Chenek, good. So skila, it means stoning, but after anybody that is stoned, afterwards they would hang the body on a tree. So you stone the person, you put him to death. Let's say he was, he cursed God, chas v'shalom, or something like that. So the punishment would be stoning. So then after he's stoned, he's hung up on a tree. Comes the next pasuk. Don't let the corpse remain on the tree overnight. Sulling, like from the word lina, lodging overnight. Don't let the corpse stay on the tree overnight. Ki kavar tik berenu b'yaymahu. Rather, you should bury him on that very day. Ki kilas Elokim Talui, because we're going to translate it. The curse of Hashem is hanging. The curse of Hashem is hanging. So we have over here a parsha. It says that somebody, chas v'shalom, has to be put to death. They hang the body after he dies. Don't leave the body hanging overnight. Rather, kavar tik berenu b'yaymahu, bury the body on that day. Okay? Any questions so far? Well, go ahead. That's a good question. That's a good question. Am I going to get to it and what I have over here? No, so I'll answer it right now. A few different answers, but the quick answer I'm going to give you is that people should see. People should see that what happens. But it shouldn't be up too much. So we're walking that tight line. Now, on one hand, we want people to know about it, but on the other hand, we want to satisfy this problem, and it's a problem of kilas Elokim Toloi, that the curse of Hashem is hanging, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
She's like a certain time, is a limited amount of time you can leave her up hanging?
Yeah, excellent. Very good question, too. Gemara says is that they would actually put him up right before nightfall and then take him down like a minute later, because you have to get him down before nightfall. So you have to get him down, I'm assuming, by Shkia, not nightfall, by sunset, right? So they'd hang him up right before sunset. Let's say, Shkia tonight is 8:15. So they'd put him up there at 8:05. They'd take him down 5 minutes later at 8:10. Something like that. Go ahead.
Usually doesn't make sure that people don't know that it's the other person?
No, it wasn't something that was hidden. As a matter of fact, they would usually wait to the 3 regalim, to the shalish regalim, so people would be there and people would understand that. And killing was not a very common thing, but if you want to enforce a rule, so eventually, you need that fear factor in any system with rules. But no, they actually, on the contrary, they wanted people to know. So the reason why we spoke about Ben Seir Umayra was just for this Rashi, even though it doesn't really fit in with the rest of what we're talking about, but I think it's a super important Rashi. Smichus haparshias. Why did the Torah put Ben Seir Umayra first, and then this parsha of somebody being killed and hanging up on a tree? Magid, it comes to tell us, Shim chosim alav avi v'imai. If the father and the mother, they protect him. They protect him. They have too much mercy on him. I can't, he's just a child. Just give him his way. He's making such a big fuss. He's throwing a tantrum. He really wants the extra money. Let's just give him this one time. It's easier. Soif sheyetze l'tarbe Yisrael v'yaver averis. At the end, he's going to go off in a very bad direction, bad habits, and he's going to commit many, many averis. He's chayiv misa beveisden, and he could end up coming to be chayiv misa and beisden. So Rashi is telling us it's a very important lesson in life, and as some teenagers, as we're children, then as we're parents, it kind of reverses. But why did the Torah put Ben Seru Meir, this kid that's going down the bad path and gets killed, right next to this parsha of somebody that committed a crime that deserves capital punishment, to tell me that if the parents decide, he's just a child, let's give in to him, let's be okay, let's look the other way, let's not, stand up to him and stand ground and set our standards, and they just constantly give in to the child, eventually he's going to turn into a spoiled brat that can't hear the word no. And when things don't work out in life and they don't have their daddy and their mommy to take care of them and give them with an open wallet, what does a 45-year-old person that doesn't know the word no do with himself? He'll steal, he'll commit crimes, he'll lead a very, very destructive, bad life. And it's important to maybe as teenagers, and then eventually as we move on to adulthood and we have our own families, that hearing the word no, not having people put up with a tantrum, and things like that is so important to building who we are and creating the adults that we need to become, that we're self-sufficient and we're resilient and we're able to live within whatever boundaries we need to live in. And that's what Rashi's coming to teach us over here, that if somebody has too much mercy and the parents say, okay, he's just a child, let him be, let's give him the extra candy. Let's say you're, as a kid, growing up in Minneapolis, so we'd go to New York to visit relatives, and going to New York was great because the only thing kosher you could get in the grocery store in Minneapolis was a graham cracker. And so you go to New York and everything's kosher, like the candy and stuff like that. And so we'd each get to pick something, but then the next aisle, I want something else, right? So we'll put this back, and then you could choose that, right? And so I started, throwing tantrums and stuff like that. No, we need that. So a good smack on the face and a firm no is what's needed over there. Imagine, okay, you know what? Okay, take another thing and take another thing and take another thing. What are you teaching this child? What are you teaching him? A solid, firm no and a good potch goes a long, long way. Hopefully in yeshiva nobody's potching anybody, but when it comes to parents and stuff like that, it goes a long way, and it's an act of mercy. It's keeping the kid in touch. How many kids over here want to upgrade their iPhones? Other than, right? How many Bachram over here asked their parents for a phone upgrade, and were told, your phone's perfectly fine. No, it's not happening, right? How many over here nudged their parents for a phone upgrade, and their parents eventually gave in? Good. That's awesome. It shouldn't happen. Just because we nudge doesn't mean that we should get our way. We need to be taught that lesson. And I think that's what Rashi's telling us. Moving on to the reason. What are these words? Ki kilas elikim toli. The curse of Hashem is hanging. I quoted a Gemara over here. Zilzulei shal melechu. Or maybe a Rashi. Oh, it's Rashi quoting Gemara. It's a zilzul. It's a, give me a word for zilzul. Somebody help me out. A degradation, thank you, of the king. Sha'adam asui bidmus diuknoi. Person is made in the image of Hashem. V'Yisrael heim banav, and us Yidden were the sons of Hashem. So if a person walks by a tree, or you walk by this wooden fixture where the body's hanging, and you see a body hanging there, you see a Yid hanging there, well, that Yid looks like Hashem. Mashal, and he gives a story, an example. L'shnei achim ta'imim, you have two twin brothers. Shahayu daimim zelazan, they're identical. Echad nasa melech, one of them turns into a king. Ve'echad nitpas l'lichstiyos v'nitle. One of them turns into a bandit, a pirate, and he ends up getting hung. Kol araya, or you say anybody that walks by and sees his body hanging, oimer hamelech toli, hey, that's the king. The king is hanging there. Then he says, Kol klala shebe mikra loshen hakel v'zilza. Whenever it uses the word klala, which we translated as a curse, but it really means degradation. So the idea behind this Kikila Elikim Tali is every single one of us, or every person, every yid that's going to be hung up, Chas v'shalom, for being Chayiv Misa, he's a twin brother with Rabbeinu Shalom. And it's a zilzul, it's a degradation to Hashem to have his identical twin hanging over there. You know, Hashem's something that we don't see, there's no natural form, but when we were little children and when our minds were less developed, most people, I think, I usually ask this to people because I always find, I'm looking for company. Most people kind of had some sort of 6, 7-year-old image of what they imagined Hashem would look like, maybe like one of the Gedalim from the books or the pictures, or maybe like Uncle Maishi, or whatever it is that they kind of, at 6 years old, when you can't understand something could exist without it being physical, most kids kind of, to incorporate all that they're learning in school, kind of created some sort of image of what they... Are you on the same page as me? You had that?
No.
I'm not the only guy. No? Oh, come on. Are you on the same page? No, not really?
Maybe like king.
Well, a king or something like that, right? So I suppose if you want to get a picture, what does Hashem look like as a 6-year-old child? Again, we're old enough to understand that something could exist without having any physicality, but it looks like Ozzy Greenspan. And it looks like Aaron Glicksman and Mookie Brea. It looks like the guy sitting next to you. It looks like what you see when you look in the mirror. It looks like what you look like when... It looks like what you see when you take a look in the mirror when you're brushing your teeth. That's godliness. And for that to be hanging up on a tree would be considered a zilzal, a degradation, an embarrassment to the Rabbeinu Shalom, and that's why we don't allow the body to stay up too long. Next piece over here, I have a problem teaching something I don't fully understand, and I usually try to shy away from that, but I think there's a message over here, and I'm going to try to work it out with you. If it doesn't come out clear, it's because of me. It's not because of you. Sefarno is one of the Rishonim, and he goes a little bit deeper on this. Hine, behold, skip the bold, Hine, Kikilas Elikim Tali, the embarrassment of Hashem is hanging. Hine, behold, Kol etzem nivdal mechoimer. Any essence that is removed, that is divorced from its physicality. Any essence that's removed from its physicality, Yikra Elikim, will be called by the name Elikim, by Hashem's name. We understand, I'd ask you, Shmili, who are you? You're Shmili. That's good. Good answer. That's a common answer, right? If Chas v'shalom you do a transplant and switch your hair for somebody else's hair, would you still be Shmili?
Yeah. No.
Let's say a kidney, Chas v'shalom.
Yeah.
You'd still be Shmili? What about a heart transplant?
Yeah.
A brain transplant?
Yeah.
Liver transplant? Yeah. You have no original parts. Essentially, you are totally Ozzy Sherazin sitting next to you. Every single aver in his body has been transplanted to your body. Shmili, who are you still? You're still Shmili, right? So what makes you Shmili? Your essence. Your etzem. Your etzem. Your very essence. Your very essence. So that would be the mashal for an etzem, an essence that is divorced from its shelf, that's divorced from its container, from its physicality. So any item, be it this cup of coffee, be it the shtender, anything that is removed from its physicality will be called by the word Elikim. Why does that make sense? Because everything that exists is existing by the will of Hashem. So if you exist, if I exist, if I'm standing here and you're breathing, and it's all because of the will of Hashem. So Hashem created some sort of case for us, or for this cup of coffee. But the very existence, its essence, is existing by the will of Hashem. So if you remove the styrofoam and the cup and the drink and the person and the flesh and the bones and the hair, you're left with a will of Hashem for Shmili Slatsky to exist. So if you cut away all the physicality, you are left with Elikim, the will of Hashem for this thing to exist. What? I'm not thinking about it now, but umizeha min hu etzem hanefesh hasichlis ba'adam. And this etzem, this inherent existence that we have, that even if Shmili would switch all of his organs with Azi, he would still be Shmili, is his ability to thank his intellect. Hanikras tzelem elikim, and that is the image of Hashem. Our ability to think, our intellect, is the image of Hashem. I'm going to skip till the next period on that line. Ubiyois, and since shabizoyin hanase lemeis achar misa, this degradation that we're hanging up the corpse after it's been killed, hu bizoyin lenefesh hasichlis, because the corpse has already been removed, right? The corpse and the essence of the person have already gone ways after death. So now this degradation, it's not a degradation. A corpse after we die, it's just stuff that has to be buried. There's nothing to it. But the degradation of the corpse of this person after he's died to his body is considered a degradation to his intellect, to his ability to think, which we just said, that is Elikim, that is Hashem. Asher he etzem nivdal, which is your essence that's already been separated, achar misas aguf, after the body's died. So Amar shehu kilas Elikim, that's considered a curse to Hashem, because so long, I suppose, as is a body, the body and the person are together. Let's talk about malchus. Somebody eats treif. So in the times of Beis Din, they get malchus, right? It says over there also, you're supposed to degrade the person. It says, "V'nikla achicha le'inecha." You should embarrass the person. But you're not embarrassing the intellect, you're embarrassing the body of the person, because the intellect and the body are together. But the second that the body and the intellect are separated, and the intellect is considered godliness, so if you're doing something to this body, you're not really doing anything to this body. It's just kicking a sack of potatoes. But since there was a connection between the intellect and the body, it's an insult, it's an embarrassment to the etzem, to the essence of the person, that now stands alone, that now stands by itself, and that would be considered an embarrassment to Hashem, because that's the part of us that is Hashem. That's all I have to say on that, but does anybody want to comment whether I came across clear on that or not? Because I'm not sure if I did. Rabbi, did I? Not great?
Not if you did or if you didn't. It's an abstract topic.
It's an abstract. Did that work for anybody? Was that valuable for anybody? Okay. It's the idea of separating our essence, who we are, from our case, our shell, and who we really are. So if I would ask you this question after we learned the Sefarna Shmili, who are you? You're Shmili, but who are you? You're God. You are, your intellect, your seichel is godliness. I'm a piece of God. What? It's hard. It's hard. Yeah, I can't say I fully understand it either. But the words help, and if you kind of chew it around in your mind for 40, 50, 70, 80, 90 years, Mir Tashem at 120, it could sink in. But that's who it is. Okay, let's move on to the next piece here. How are we on time? We're okay? Okay. Gemara in Sanhedrin. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Minayin lemeilin esameis. How do I know that if I leave the corpse to sit overnight on the tree, she'oiver alav b'loisasei, that I'm over an avera in the Torah, and it's a mitzvah loisasei not to leave it up. Talmud Leimer, because the Torah says ki kavart tik barenu, you shall surely bury him. Mikan, from here we learn lemalanes meisei she'oiver b'loisasei, that anybody that leaves the body overnight, you're over an avera. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan is basically quoting what we said before, that you must bury the body. You may not leave the body overnight. How do I know that I may not leave the body overnight? It says, Ki kavar tik barenu, you shall surely bury him. So I'm saying the obvious question would be the Torah says, Leisali nivlase ala eitz. Don't leave the body on the tree. So the answer to that would be, well, that's talking about somebody that was killed by Beis Din. Let's say anybody else that just dies of a natural cause. How do I know I cannot leave his body overnight? How do I know I can't leave his body unnecessarily just to sit there because it's not convenient to bury him? So on that we say, Ki kavar tik barenu. because it's not referring to the actual words in the Torah, Leisalin niflasei ala eitz. It's rather referring to ki kavarti brenu, you shall surely bury him. So Leisalin niflasei ala eitz, that would be talking about somebody that was killed by Beis Din. How do I know a regular person that's sitting at Berkowitz, Kumin, should not be sitting overnight if it could be prevented? Ki kavarti brenu, because you shall surely bury him. Well, that just tells me I should bury him. Doesn't tell me that there's an isser to leave him overnight. So for there we have the next line, Rashi, Hachi Garsin and Talmud Loimer Kiki Avartik Berenu, Miribuya Darish Kol Amesim. Since the Torah says Kavartik Berenu, it's a double lashon, you shall surely bury him. From that double lashon, that ribuya, that inclusive term, it's coming to tell me not anybody that necessarily dies from Beis Din, and not only to bury them, but you shall surely bury them, and you should bury them right away and not leave them overnight. That's Rabbi Yechanan quoting Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Now the Gemara is going to go ahead and bring up another version of what Rabbi Yechanan said in the name of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and there's going to be a slight difference, and there's going to be a nafkamina la'alacha that the Rambam is going to talk about. Igadamri. There are those that say, and we'll review it after we see the second lashon. There are those that say a different version, Rabbi Yechanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Amar Rabbi Yechanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Remez likvura min atayra minayin. What's a hint that there's a mitzvah to bury people from the Torah? Where do we know that the Torah says to hint? Talmud Leimer, the Torah tells me to bury. Talmud Leimer, the Torah tells me ki kavartik berenu, you should surely bury a person. Mikan remez likvura min atayra. From here we have a hint that you need to bury people from the Torah. There's an obvious question that people should be having. Let's wait for a second. Amarle Shvur Malka l'Rav Chama. This probably a not Jewish queen was known as Shvur Malka, and she's quoted very often in the Gemara, asking all types of questions, challenging the Amoraim with different things. It was probably done out of respect and a wanting to know as opposed to out of spite. But Kvura min atayra minayin. Where do we know Kvura from the Torah? So this Shvur Malka, this queen, asked Rav Chama, where do you know? I see you Jews, you're all so busy with burying people, and it's always so important to you, and it takes up such a prominent role in Jewish communal life, burying the Chevra Kadisha. Where do you have the source? Well, how do you know that you must bury people? Ishtik. Rav Chama kept quiet. Amar le v'lei midi, and he didn't say anything. V'lei amar le v'lei midi, he didn't say anything. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, so Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who heard about this, he said to Rav Chama, Imser alma biyada de tipshoy. It seems as if the world's been given over to fools, meaning he's calling Rav Chama a fool. Like, there's an obvious answer. You should have told her what? Di boy leila meimar, you should have told her, ki kavar, Ki kavar, that it says in the Torah, exactly what we just mentioned. Ki kavar tikberenu, you shall bury him. So Rav Acha is saying back to Rav Chama, or he's saying about Rav Chama, that foolish. There's a word in the Torah. Shvur Malka asked you, how do you know? You need a Chevra Kadisha and you need to bury people, and you keep quiet. Why do you keep quiet? The Torah says ki kavar, you shall bury. So the Gemara responds, well, no, maybe not, because maybe I could have looked at the word of ki kavar, you should bury, the la'avid le arain. That maybe you should just make him a coffin, but doesn't mean you actually have to put him in the ground. Put him in a mausoleum or something. Tikbarenu leimashmale. And from the word tikbarenu, it doesn't imply they actually have to bury him in the ground. So he didn't want to respond with the words that we talked about from the pasuk, because maybe these words could have been pushed off to the side and says it doesn't mean they actually have to dig a hole and put the body in the ground. So Rav Chama says further, well, okay, fine, maybe you're right. These words in the Torah, they're not exact that you need to actually bury the body. Maybe it'd be enough just to put him in a casket and put him in a mausoleum or something. But nema mi de ikvar tzadike. We see that the Torah talks about it all the time. Miriam died, Moshe Rabbeinu died, Yosef, Hatzadek, Yaakov, the Maris Machpelah, Avram, Yitzchak, right? We have many, many instances in the Torah where we see that the tzaddikim were all buried, and the Torah talks about it. So that should be the source that there's a requirement. So on that, the Gemara says, well, no, that doesn't show me that you need to do it. Maybe minhaga ba'alma. Maybe it's just minig that we had to do that. So now the Gemara suggests, well, maybe Mida Akbari HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't do minhagim. We see that Hashem buried Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem did the burial of Moshe, right? We know that Torah says that we don't know where Moshe was buried. Hashem, somehow, he buried Moshe Rabbeinu. And that says, maybe Hashem was only doing that also, not to deviate from the common custom. So this second version of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, is bringing up that we don't have a clear source, a clear chiyuv to bury anybody. At best, we have a minhag that burial is required. Now, the Gemara does, again, let me repeat that carefully, does not mean that burial is not required, but the source to burial, we don't have that clearly in the Torah. From this second version, we don't have a clear source for burial. At best, we have a remez, a hint, which obligates us, but it's not a clear source, or it's a minhag, or it's a custom. The first version we had was not even talking about burial. It was saying, how do we know that we're not supposed to leave the body overnight? So one more time. The first version of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said that the words kavar tikbarenu are coming to teach me that I cannot leave the body overnight. The second version says that the words kavar tikbarenu, they might not be a concrete source, but it's a remez that this is what the Torah wants. It is an obligation without a concrete source. I'm sorry, that's the way it should be presented. One more time. The first version of Reb Shimon ben Yochai is telling me that the words kavar tikbarenu are telling me you can't leave the body overnight. And we don't speak at all about any source or any concrete source for burial. Kavar tikbarenu tell me that you don't leave the body overnight. The second version of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, the Ikad Da'amri of the Gemara, is telling me that kavar tikbarenu and that Hashem buried tzaddikim, and that we buried tzaddikim in the Torah. We see that all the tzaddikim were buried. That is the source. It's not necessarily a source of a concrete source, but it's enough of, at least as a remez, that burial has to happen. So I would ask you right now, what would be the difference between the first two sources? Go ahead.
First source is that you can't leave it out overnight if you bury it.
Well, maybe that you don't need to bury it. We don't have any. According to the first version of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, we don't have a source that you need to bury. Yeah.
Second source is that it's an obligation.
It's an obligation to bury, even though we don't have a clear source. At best, it's a hint. Okay, so let's just read the Rambam, then we'll be done. Rambam Hilchas Eivel, hahesped kavod hamesu, eulogizing, saying good things about the person is kavod hamesu. Do I have time for my story? Quick story. When I was in Scranton, 9th grade, halacha is that a Jew needs to fill in the grave. And my first time, so they would come pick up yeshiva guys to go fill in the grave. Rabbi Kushner takes guys here from time to time to do it. It's a big mitzvah, beautiful thing. So the halachas are is that the first 3 times you do it backwards. You don't hand the shovel from hand to hand. So there was this person that had died. His second wife wasn't Jewish, and he didn't really lead a great life. It was very interesting that the rabbi still managed to pull out a beautiful eulogy about him, about how he loved his family, and he liked the bingo club, and he liked all the things he liked. It was beautiful. And then the rabbi told us, the rules about filling in the hole, and there's a big, beautiful casket. The Jewish minhag is not to have a ornate casket, just simple plywood, but this is not a person that led a life that follows minhagim, and he had a big, beautiful, expensive casket. It's my first time filling in the hole, and there's a huge, rock, and I'm pushing in, the dirt, and the rock crack, thud, and the widow starts crying. So Rabbi Fein from Scranton comes over to me, puts his hand around my shoulders, and says, Kutov, the minhag is to save the big rocks for the end. And then everybody started laughing, and it was all okay. Okay, so says the Rambam, Hesped kavod hamesu, saying a eulogy is covered for the mace. Lefikach, therefore, kaifin as a yarshin litein tzchar mekainen mekainen noisa soiften noisai. If it requires a fee to get a hesped, to get a eulogy going, we force the Yarshim, we force his children to take on that expense and to pay for a hesped. However, let's say the person left in his testament and his will, I don't want any eulogies. So then what? So then you don't do it. You don't do it. It's a covet for the mace, and if the mace lets it be known his wish is that he does not want eulogies, so he is allowed to forgive that honor, that respect. Aval, however, imtziva shelo yikaver ein shaymin lai. If he commands that I don't want to be buried, we do not listen to him. So let's say somebody would leave in their will and testament. Rabbi Kushner gets this all the time. Somebody says that he wants to be cremated and have his ashes spread out and not put in the ground, or he wants to be put into a mausoleum. The Chevra Kadisha will not listen to that, and they will still bury the person against his will, against his wishes. Shenemar, as it says, Ki kavar tikberenu, that you shall surely bury. So I ask you over here, who is the Rambam going like? The Rambam should be this should be reminiscent of that Rashi we said, that Ki kavar tikberenu is teaching me a chiyuv to bury. Okay? So I would say that the Rambam is, I'd say the Rambam's going like the second version, where we're using the words kavar tikberenu to teach me burying, and not kavar tikberenu to teach me that he shouldn't be staying up overnight, or that the body should be sitting overnight.